In Silicon Valley's gleaming TechNova headquarters, a brilliant AI architect was about to discover the true cost of innovation. What started as a routine meeting with executives took a shocking turn when they came face to face with corporate betrayal on an unprecedented scale. Olivia Barnes wasn't your typical software engineer. For 3 grueling years, she had spent her life designing ARIA, a revolutionary $890 million AI system that could reshape civilization, known for her ability to solve problems that stumped entire departments of PhDs, only to watch executives slash her salary by 59% while claiming credit for her groundbreaking work. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The amber glow of the server room cast ethereal shadows across Olivia Barnes's face as she watched 3 years of her life come to fruition. ARIA, autonomous reasoning and intelligence architecture, hummed quietly through its final diagnostic sequence, each processor cycle representing countless sleepless nights, missed dinners, and the slow erosion of everything she'd once called a normal life. "Show me the Johannesburg scenario again," she whispered to her lead engineer, Chen, who sat hunched over his workstation with the familiar 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd been living on caffeine and determination for too long. The main display flickered to life, revealing a complex urban simulation, traffic patterns, power grids, water distribution networks, and emergency services all pulsed in real time across the screen, like the neural pathways of a vast digital brain. ARIA absorbed it all, millions of data points streaming in simultaneously, and began making decisions. "Traffic light optimization at Pritchard and Main," Chen read aloud, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and awe. "Rerouting 3 emergency vehicles through alternate corridors, adjusting power distribution to compensate for peak demand, reallocating water pressure to prevent burst pipes in the Eastern District." He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's processing 47,000 variables simultaneously and optimizing for outcomes 18 moves ahead." Olivia felt the familiar flutter of pride mixed with protective anxiety that always came when watching her creation work. ARIA wasn't just sophisticated, it was revolutionary. Unlike the narrow AI systems that dominated the current market, ARIA could reason across multiple domains simultaneously, weighing complex ethical considerations alongside practical outcomes. It could manage an entire city's infrastructure while ensuring no elderly resident went without heat during a winter storm, no child walked to school through an unsafe intersection. 3 years, she murmured, more to herself than to Chen. 3 years since Marcus Wellington had first approached her at MIT's annual AI symposium, his Harvard MBA confidence radiating like expensive cologne, as he painted visions of technology that could reshape civilization. 3 years since she'd walked into TechNova's gleaming Palo Alto headquarters, believing she could build something that would make the world better. The lab door hissed open behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to recognize the measured footsteps approaching. Marcus had a particular way of walking, purposeful, entitled, as if the very floor should feel honored to bear his weight. "Olivia." His voice carried that smooth, practiced warmth that had once made her feel valued, important. Now it just sounded calculated. "Still burning the midnight oil, I see." She turned, forcing a smile that felt increasingly hollow these days. Marcus stood in the doorway wearing his signature tailored navy suit, somehow managing to look perfectly groomed despite the late hour. Behind him lurked James Crawford, TechNova's head of legal, a man whose pale complexion and perpetually narrowed eyes reminded Olivia unpleasantly of a snake preparing to strike. "The investor presentation is tomorrow," Olivia said, gesturing toward the display where ARIA continued its seamless orchestration of the digital Johannesburg. "I wanted to run through the scenarios one more time." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes scanning the data streams with the hungry intensity of a predator calculating the value of its prey. "Impressive as always. Though I have to ask," he paused, that calculated smile never wavering, "how much of this could be replicated by the team? I mean, you've done excellent work leading the project, but surely the core innovations emerged from our collaborative environment." The words hit her like ice water. Olivia blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, team effort," Marcus continued smooth. That's what makes TechNova special, our collaborative approach to innovation. No single individual could have created something this sophisticated alone. Chen shot her a look of barely concealed alarm. He'd been there for every late-night breakthrough, every moment of inspired problem-solving that had brought ARIA to life. He knew, as did everyone on the development team, that ARIA's revolutionary architecture had sprung from Olivia's mind like a digital Athena. Of course, she managed, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. Team effort. James Crawford chose that moment to materialize beside Marcus, carrying a leather portfolio with the care one might reserve for radioactive material. Speaking of teams, he said, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of making legal threats sound like casual conversation. We have some updated employment agreements that need signature. Standard intellectual property clarifications. Nothing dramatic. He handed her a thick contract, the pages filled with dense legal language that made her eyes water just looking at it. But even through the bureaucratic fog, certain phrases leaped out at her. Work for hire, exclusive assignment of intellectual property, no right to royalties or ongoing compensation. This is standard? She asked, her throat suddenly dry. Absolutely, James replied with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Industry standard for AI development. We're just making sure everything's properly documented for the investor presentation. Olivia flipped through the pages, her brilliant mind, the same mind that had conceived ARIA's groundbreaking architecture, now struggling to process the implications of what she was reading. It was as if they were asking her to sign away not just her rights to the technology, but to the very thoughts that had created it. I'll need some time to review this, she said carefully. Of course, Marcus agreed, though his smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Though we'll need everything finalized before the presentation. Investors like clean paperwork. After they left, the lab felt different, smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved in while she wasn't looking. Chen was studying her with the concerned expression of someone who'd just watched his mentor receive a terminal diagnosis. You created this, he said quietly, nodding toward ARIA's displays. Every algorithm, every decision tree, every ethical framework, we all know it. Olivia stared at the contract in her hands, then at the screens showing her digital child making decisions that could improve millions of lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd created an artificial intelligence capable of navigating complex moral landscapes, yet she found herself trapped in an ethical maze with no clear path forward. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Movie night. I got that Korean thriller you wanted to see. The simple normalcy of it made her chest tighten. When was the last time she'd gone to a movie? When was the last time she'd come home before midnight, or had a conversation that didn't revolve around neural networks and decision matrices? She texted back, still at lab. Rain. The response came immediately. You said that last week, and the week before. I miss you. 3 words that somehow carried more weight than all the legal documents James Crawford could produce. David had been patient, more patient than she deserved, as she'd poured herself into ARIA's development. But she could feel the distance growing between them, measured not in miles but in missed dinners, abandoned weekend plans, and conversations that she ended with just 5 more minutes, that turned into hours. By 2 a.m., the lab had emptied, except for Olivia, and the quiet hum of ARIA's processor. She sat alone in the blue glow of monitors, watching her creation manage its digital world with effortless grace, and tried to reconcile the triumph she should be feeling with the growing hollow sensation in her chest. Tomorrow, Marcus would stand before a room full of investors and present ARIA as TechNova's latest breakthrough, a $890 million autonomous decision-making system that would revolutionize how cities, corporations, and governments operate. The presentations would be polished, the demonstrations flawless, the potential applications limitless. What they wouldn't mention was the woman who'd sacrificed 3 years of her life to birth this digital consciousness, who'd solved problems that had stumped entire departments of PhD, who'd written the code that gave ARIA its revolutionary ability to balance competing priorities with something approaching wisdom. As she finally gathered her things to leave, Marcus's words echoed in her memory. Team F. The phrase felt like a premonition, though of what, she couldn't yet say. The parking garage was empty, except for her aging Honda and the shadows cast by fluorescent security lights. As she walked toward her car, her footsteps echoing in the concrete cavern, she didn't notice the figure watching from the executive parking level above, or the way Marcus Wellington's silhouette lingered at the window, long after her taillights disappeared into the California night. Behind them both, ARIA continued its silent work, optimizing and improving the digital Johannesburg with the tireless dedication of its creator, unaware that its birth had set forces in motion that would soon test every ethical framework Olivia Barnes had so carefully programmed into its artificial soul. The week that followed ARIA's successful investor presentation passed in a blur of congratulatory emails, media interviews, and the intoxicating rush of validation that Olivia had craved for 3 years. TechStock Weekly featured ARIA on its cover with the headline, "The Mind That Will Change Everything." Venture Capital Digest called it the most significant breakthrough in autonomous systems since the invention of the microprocessor. But it was the email from Marcus that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. "Olivia, outstanding work on the presentation. Let's discuss your future at TechNova, Conference Room 12A, Friday 2 p.m. This conversation is long overdue." Friday morning, Olivia stood before her bathroom mirror, selecting her outfit with the care of someone preparing for a job interview rather than a promotion discussion. The charcoal blazer David had bought her for Christmas, the pearl earrings her mother had given her when she'd graduated from MIT, armor disguised as professional attire. "You deserve this," she whispered to her reflection, practicing the confident smile she'd wear when Marcus offered her the VP of AI development position. Maybe even a seat on the board. After ARIA's reception, anything seemed possible. David appeared behind her in the mirror, adjusting his tie with the methodical precision of someone who'd been getting ready for work the same way for 8 years. His reflection caught her eye, and she saw something there, concern maybe, or resignation. "Big meeting today?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The big meeting," she corrected, turning to face him. "I think Marcus is finally going to recognize what I've accomplished." David's smile was gentle but didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just remember what we talked about, okay? About balance, about us." She kissed his cheek, already mentally rehearsing her acceptance speech. "After today, everything's going to be different. Better." Conference Room 12A occupied a corner of TechNova's executive floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Silicon Valley's tech campuses sprawling toward the horizon. When Olivia arrived at exactly 2 p.m., she found Marcus seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by James Crawford and 3 other executives she recognized but had never spoken to directly. The setup should have been her first warning. "Olivia," Marcus rose with that practiced smile, gesturing to a chair positioned directly across from the assembled executives. "Thank you for joining us. Please." She settled into the chair, noting how it seemed lower than the others, forcing her to look up at the men arrayed before her like a tribunal. James Crawford had his leather portfolio open, documents spread across the table like evidence in a case she didn't know she was defending. "First," Marcus began, "let me say that your work on ARIA has been exemplary. The investor response exceeded our most optimistic projections." Olivia felt her shoulders relax. "Thank you. I'm excited to discuss how we can." "However," Marcus continued, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, "we need to address some structural changes to ensure TechNova's continued growth in the current market environment." The word, however, hit her like a physical blow. In her experience, nothing good ever followed, however, in a corporate boardroom. "The board has approved a comprehensive restructuring plan," James Crawford interjected, sliding a document across the table. "Market conditions require us to optimize our cost structure while maintaining competitive advantage." Olivia's eyes scanned the document, her brilliant mind, the same mind that had conceived ARIA's revolutionary architecture, struggling to process what she was reading. The numbers seemed wrong, impossible. A 59% reduction in her base salary, the elimination of her stock options, a reclassification from lead AI architect to senior developer. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice sounding distant even to herself. "ARIA just secured $190 million in investor commitments." "Exactly," Marcus replied, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied air of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow child, and that success demonstrates the strength of our collaborative development model. Your individual contribution, while significant, was part of a larger team effort. The phrase individual contribution hung in the air like an accusation. Olivia looked around the table, meeting the eyes of executives who'd never set foot in the development lab, who couldn't write a line of code if their lives depended on it, who were now sitting in judgment of work they couldn't begin to comprehend. My individual contribution. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. I designed every algorithm, I wrote the core decision frameworks, I solved the autonomous reasoning paradox that your previous team spent 2 years failing to crack. Which brings us to another point, James Crawford said, producing another document with the efficiency of a magician, pulling rabbits from a hat. The intellectual property assignments you signed need some clarification. It's important that we have clear documentation of TechNova's ownership of all ARIA-related innovations. Olivia stared at the new contract, the legal language swimming before her eyes. Phrases like retroactive assignment of all intellectual property and waiver of inventors' rights seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. This says I have no claim to any patents or royalties, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Standard industry practice, Marcus assured her. You were compensated for your time and quite generously. The company invested millions in development resources, laboratory space, computational power. Surely you understand that individual contributors can't expect to own the innovations they develop on company time with company resource. The room tilted slightly, as if the building itself had shifted on its foundation. 3 years of 16-hour days, of sacrificing her relationship with David, of pouring her brilliance into code that would change the world, and now they were telling her it had never been hers to begin with. What about the Forbes interview next week? She asked, grasping for something solid in the shifting landscape of her reality. The one where I'm supposed to discuss ARIA's development process. Actually, Marcus said, his smile taking on a predatory quality, we've decided I should handle that interview. As CEO, I can speak more broadly about TechNova's strategic vision and collaborative culture. You understand? She understood that Marcus Wellington would sit across from a Forbes reporter and discuss his revolutionary AI system, that his face would grace magazine covers as the visionary who'd brought autonomous reasoning to the mass, that her name, if mentioned at all, would be buried in a footnote about the talented team that made it possible. I need time to think about this, Olivia said, standing on unsteady legs. Of course, Marcus replied, but we'll need your signature on these documents by Monday. The board has already approved the restructuring, and we can't delay implementation. James Crawford gathered his papers with the satisfied efficiency of someone who'd just won a case. Oh, and Olivia, the confidentiality clauses in your employment agreement remain in effect. Any public discussion of proprietary development processes or internal company matters would constitute a breach of contract. The threat was delivered with the casual politeness of someone offering directions to the nearest coffee shop, but its implications were clear. Speak out about what had happened, and TechNova would destroy her. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt endless. Olivia stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors, seeing a stranger wearing her clothes, her face, her carefully chosen armor. The woman in the reflection looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the meeting had physically compressed her into a more manageable size. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. How did it go? Champagne dinner tonight. She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Not tonight, need some time to process. Bad news? Different news. I'll explain later. But as she sat in her car in the parking garage, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the closer sound of her own labored breathing, Olivia wondered how she could possibly explain what had just happened. How do you tell someone that 3 years of your life had been retroactively classified as team effort? How do you describe the feeling of watching your intellectual children be claimed by strangers? Above her, 47 floors up, Marcus Wellington stood at the window of his corner office, looking down at the parking garage where a small figure sat motionless in an aging Honda. On his desk, the latest issue of Tech Stock Weekly lay open to the ARIA cover story. His name prominently featured in the subtitle, Marcus Wellington's Vision for Autonomous Intelligence. The smile on his face was the same one he'd worn in the conference room, practiced, satisfied, and utterly without warmth. It was the smile of a man who'd just successfully claimed ownership of the future. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive home from TechNova passed in a haze of traffic lights and turn signals that Olivia navigated on autopilot, her mind trapped in an endless loop of replaying the conference room scene. Marcus's words echoed with crystalline clarity, individual contribution, part of a larger team effort. Each repetition felt like a scalpel, precisely cutting away pieces of her identity until she wasn't sure what remained. David was grading papers at the kitchen table when she walked through the door, red pen marks scattered across student essays like droplets of blood. He looked up with the expectant smile she'd once found so comforting, the expression of someone preparing to celebrate good news. "So," he asked, setting down his pen. "VP Barnes has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The words caught in her throat. "How do you explain that everything you believed about your value, your worth, your very identity had been systematically dismantled in the span of 30 minutes? They cut my salary," she said finally, the words coming out flat and strange. 59%. David blinked, as if he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Market restructuring, cost optimization. My individual contribution was significant, but not extraordinary." She recited the corporate speak like a mantra, each phrase tasting of ash and broken promises. David's chair scraped against the hardwood as he stood, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief and finally anger. "That's insane. You created ARIA. Without you, they'd have nothing." Apparently it was a team effort. The silence that followed was deafening. David moved toward her, his teacher's instinct to comfort warring with his practical mind's need to understand the implications. "Okay, we'll figure this out. You'll find another job. Maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise. You can finally get away from that toxic place." His words were meant to comfort, but they struck her like physical blows. Another job, as if 3 years of groundbreaking innovation could be simply transferred to another company, another cubicle, another corporate master who would smile while stealing her ideas. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "It's not just about the money. They're erasing me. Marcus is doing interviews next week about his revolutionary AI system, my algorithms, my architecture, my breakthrough, and I'm not even allowed to talk about it because of confidentiality clauses." David's expression shifted to something she'd never seen before, a kind of careful patience that teachers reserved for particularly challenging students. "I know it's unfair, but sometimes life isn't about what we deserve. Sometimes we have to accept what happens and move forward." Move forward. The phrase hit her like a slap. Move forward from what? 3 years of her life, the most important work she'd ever done, the technology that would reshape civilization, now bearing another man's name. Move forward. The words came out sharp enough to "David, they stole my life's work and you want me to move forward. I want you to come home," he said quietly. "You've been disappearing piece by piece for 3 years. Maybe this is a chance to remember who you were before ARIA consumed your entire existence." The accusation hung between them like a chasm. Olivia stared at the man she'd planned to marry, seeing suddenly how the distance between them had grown, not in miles but in understanding. He saw her obsession with ARIA as a character flaw to be corrected. She saw it as the most important work of her generation being systematically stolen. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside her, his breathing steady and untroubled. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's predatory smile, heard James Crawford's casual threats, felt the weight of documents designed to erase her from the history of her own creation. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of mundane assignments and mounting despair. TechNova had reassigned her to optimization projects, fixing other people's code, debugging systems she could have written better in her sleep. It was intellectual purgatory, designed to remind her of her place in the corporate hierarchy. Meanwhile, Marcus Wellington's face appeared everywhere. Forbes, Wired, MIT Technology Review, a parade of magazine covers featuring the visionary CEO, who'd revolutionized artificial intelligence. In each interview he spoke eloquently about collaborative innovation, the power of team-based development, and his personal commitment to ethical AI advancement. Olivia bought every magazine, read every article, each one feeling like a fresh wound. The worst part wasn't just the credit theft. It was how articulate Marcus sounded discussing her work. He'd absorbed enough technical knowledge to speak convincingly about ARIA's capabilities, peppering his responses with just enough detail to sound like the brilliant mind behind the breakthrough. It was during one particularly soul-crushing afternoon of debugging legacy code that Sarah Mitchell appeared at her cubicle like an angel of mercy. Olivia's former colleague had always possessed an uncanny ability to show up precisely when she was needed most, and seeing her familiar face nearly brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "Coffee?" Sarah asked, simply, and Olivia was already reaching for her jacket. The cafe they chose was deliberately far from TechNova's campus, a small independent place where tech workers were unlikely to venture. Sarah ordered for them both black coffee for herself, the elaborate caramel creation that Olivia used to love but hadn't tasted in months. "You look terrible," Sarah said without preamble, her characteristic directness unchanged since her TechNova days. "Thanks. Really what I needed to hear. I heard about the restructuring." Sarah's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone navigating emotional minefield. "Actually, I heard about several restructuring. Yours was just the most egregious." Olivia looked up sharply. "Several. Martinez, in cybersecurity. Chen from your old team. 3 people from the quantum computing division." Sarah counted them off on her fingers like a casualty list. Always the same pattern: massive salary cuts right after their innovations pay off. Always with the same legal threats to keep them quiet. The revelation hit Olivia like a physical blow. She'd assumed her situation was unique, a targeted attack on her specifically. To learn it was systematic, a deliberate pattern of exploitation, somehow made it both better and infinitely worse. "Chen?" she whispered. "They did this to Chen too?" 40% cut, reclassified as a junior developer. "The kid who helped you solve the recursive decision paradox is now debugging smartphone apps." The coffee in Olivia's stomach turned to acid. Chen, brilliant and dedicated, who'd worked alongside her through countless late nights, who'd been there for every breakthrough. If they could do this to him, to Martinez, to others, how many brilliant minds had Marcus Wellington's machine chewed up and discarded? "Why didn't you tell me before?" Sarah's expression grew carefully neutral. "Because I knew what you'd want to do about it, and I know how dangerous those thoughts can be," but the seed was already planted. As they sat in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the cafe windows, Olivia felt something crystallizing in her chest. Not quite rage, not quite resolution, but something harder and colder than either. "There has to be something we can do," she said quietly. "Some way to fight back." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying her friend's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. Finally she sighed. "You know, Quantum Dynamics has been recruiting aggressively lately. Former TechNova people, specifically. They're apparently very interested in acquiring talent and insights from their competitors." The words hung in the air between them, innocent on the surface, but heavy with implication. Olivia felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't quite articulate why. "Just talent?" she asked carefully. "Well," Sarah said, stirring her coffee with deliberate slowness, "in the tech world, talent and technology often go hand in hand. It's hard to separate the creator from the creation." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching Silicon Valley's endless parade of ambition and innovation flow past the cafe windows. When Olivia finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, Sarah had to lean forward to hear her. "What kind of recruiting?" Sarah's smile was sad and knowing, the kind that recognizes when brilliant people have been badly undervalued by their current employers, the kind that believes in proper compensation for revolutionary innovations. As they parted ways in the cafe parking lot, Sarah gave her a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Be careful, Liv. Whatever you're thinking, be very careful. Some doors, once you walk through them, don't have handles on the other side." But as Olivia drove back to TechNova's gleaming campus, past the billboards featuring Marcus Wellington's smiling face, past the banners celebrating ARIA's commercial success, she wondered if she'd already walked through one of those doors the moment she'd signed her original employment contract. The only question now was whether she had the courage to kick down the door on the other side. The coffee shop Sarah had suggested was tucked into a corner of downtown Mountain View, far enough from both TechNova and Quantum Dynamics to avoid accidental encounters with colleagues. Olivia arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table near the back where conversations couldn't be easily overheard. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her mug, whether from caffeine or nerves, she couldn't. Emma Richardson arrived precisely on time, moving through the cafe with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to making entrances. She was smaller than Olivia had expected, perhaps 5'4" in expensive heels, with auburn hair pulled back in a style that managed to look both professional and approachable. But it was her eyes that caught Olivia's attention, sharp, calculating, the kind of gaze that seemed to catalog and evaluate everything it touched. Olivia Barnes, Emma said, extending a manicured hand as she approached the table. I've been looking forward to this conversation. They'd made contact through carefully coded LinkedIn messages, ostensibly about career transition opportunities in the AI sector. Emma had suggested they meet to discuss mutual interests and potential synergies, language so corporate neutral it could have meant anything or nothing. Thank you for making time, Olivia replied, studying Emma's face for any hint of her true intentions. I understand Quantum Dynamics is expanding their AI division aggressively. Emma's smile was warm but somehow predatory. We believe the next 5 years will determine which companies dominate the autonomous intelligence space. First mover advantage is everything. She ordered an elaborate coffee drink that required 3 different syrups and foam art, the kind of order that suggested someone comfortable with demanding exactly what she wanted. While they waited, Emma made small talk about the tech industry's rapid evolution, but Olivia caught her making subtle assessments, noting her worn laptop bag, the slight fraying on her blazer cuffs, the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Sarah Mitchell speaks very highly of you, Emma said once their drinks arrived. She mentioned you've been having some frustrations with your current situation. The word frustrations was delivered with surgical precision, its implications clear without being legally actionable. Olivia found herself appreciating Emma's careful choice of language even as she recognized it as a manipulation technique. TechNova has undergone some restructuring, Olivia replied carefully. The current environment doesn't seem to value individual innovation as much as I'd hoped. Emma's expression conveyed perfect understanding without requiring details. That's unfortunately common in larger organizations. Bureaucracy tends to flatten exceptional contributions into team achievements. The phrase hit uncomfortably close to home. Olivia felt her carefully maintained composure crack slightly, and Emma's eyes sharpened like a predator sensing weakness. You worked on ARIA, Emma continued, her tone conversational but her attention laser-focused. Impressive system. The autonomous reasoning capabilities are genuinely revolutionary. It was a team effort, Olivia said automatically, the corporate programming still strong enough to surface even here. Emma's laugh was knowing and slightly sad. Of course it, just like the iPhone was a team effort, even though Jonathan Ives' fingerprints were on every design decision, just like Windows was a team effort, even though Bill Gates drove every strategic choice. She leaned forward slightly. But we both know who the real architects are, don't we? The acknowledgement felt like cool water on burned skin. For the first time in weeks, someone was recognizing her individual contribution without dismissing it as corporate collaboration. Emma seemed to understand this, letting the moment breathe before continuing. Quantum Dynamics approaches talent acquisition differently, she said. We believe exceptional individuals deserve exceptional recognition and compensation. Olivia's pulse quickened. What kind of recognition? The kind where your name goes on the patents, where you speak at conferences about your innovations, where your intellectual property is valued appropriately. Emma paused, studying Olivia's reaction. Where someone of your caliber can work on problems worthy of their talents. The offer was carefully constructed, appealing to both financial need and intellectual pride. Olivia found herself imagining a world where she could discuss her work openly, where her innovations weren't filtered through Marcus Wellington's corporate mouthpiece, where she could build something new without looking over her shoulder. What kind of problems? She asked. Emma's smile became more genuine. Quantum dynamics is developing what we call the Prometheus system, autonomous intelligence for critical infrastructure management. Think ARIA's capabilities, but scaled to handle entire metropolitan areas, power grids, transportation network. The complexity makes ARIA look like a pocket calculator. Despite herself, Olivia felt her scientific curiosity stirring. The technical challenges Emma described were exactly the kind of problems she'd dreamed of tackling when she'd first entered the AI field. Problems that could change civilization, administered by someone who understood their true value. Of course, Emma continued, a project of that scope requires understanding the current state of the art. We'd need to know exactly how existing systems like ARIA achieve their autonomous reasoning. The architecture, the decision frameworks, the ethical weighting algorithms. There it was, delivered so smoothly that it almost sounded like a technical discussion rather than a request for corporate espionage. Emma's expression remained perfectly neutral, as if she'd suggested nothing more controversial than sharing a research paper. That would be proprietary information, Olivia said carefully. Which is why we only discuss such matters with potential employees who might bring relevant experience to new projects. Emma's tone was matter-of-fact. Clean room implementations, of course. We'd never ask anyone to violate their legal obligation. The phrase clean room implementations was tech industry speak for recreating patented technology without directly copying code. A legal gray area that companies navigated with expensive lawyers and careful documentation. But Emma's implication was clear: they wanted ARIA's innovations, and they were prepared to pay handsomely for someone who could deliver them. What would that kind of position look like? Olivia asked, her mouth dry despite the cough. Emma reached into her purse and produced a business card with nothing but a phone number written in elegant script. Senior AI architect, base salary of $400,000. Plus equity that could be worth millions if Prometheus succeeds. Full intellectual property recognition. Your own lab, your own team, budget approval for whatever resources you need. The numbers hit Olivia like electricity. $400,000, nearly triple her original TechNova salary, more than 8 times what she was making now. But it was the phrase intellectual property recognition that made her breath catch. Her name on the patents, her innovations attributed to her, not stolen by smiling executives. I'd need to think about it, she managed. Of course. Emma stood gracefully, leaving the business card on the table between them. Take all the time you need. Though I should mention, we're hoping to accelerate Prometheus development significantly. The window for joining the project as a founding architect won't be open indefinitely. The threat was delivered with the same warm smile Emma had worn throughout their conversation. But its meaning was unmistakable. Decide quickly or miss the opportunity entirely. After Emma left, Olivia sat alone in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at the business card as if it might reveal hidden messages. Around her, the ordinary bustle of Silicon Valley continued. Entrepreneurs pitching investors, programmers debugging code. The endless churn of innovation and ambition that defined this corner of the world. But for Olivia, everything had shifted. Emma's offer wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about reclaiming her identity as an innovator. About working on problems that matched her abilities. About escaping the corporate machine that had tried to grind her into anonymity. She thought about Marcus Wellington's face on magazine covers. About Chen debugging smartphone apps. About 3 years of her life reduced team effort. She thought about David's advice to move forward, to accept what couldn't be changed. Then she thought about ARIA, still humming quietly in TechNova's servers, making decisions with algorithms she'd crafted, solving problems with logic she'd programmed, improving the world with innovations that bore another man's name. When she finally left the coffee shop, the business card was tucked safely in her wallet, next to her TechNova employee ID. As she walked to her car, she didn't notice Emma Richardson watching from across the street, or the satisfied smile that crossed the recruiter's face as she placed her own phone call. She's perfect, Emma said quietly into her phone. Brilliant, angry and desperate. Give me 2 weeks, and we'll have everything we need to build our own ARIA. The discovery came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, buried in an automated patent filing notification that arrived in Olivia's work email. She'd been lying awake again, staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside her, when her phone buzzed with the corporate spam that usually went straight to her trash folder. This time, something made her look. Patent application due US 2024-023456-7. Autonomous neural architecture for multi-domain decision processing. Primary inventor Marcus Wellington. Secondary contributors, TechNova development team. The blood in her veins turned to ice water. She crept to the living room, her laptop screen casting harsh blue light across her face as she pulled up the patent database. Page after page of technical specifications unfolded before her. Her specifications, her architecture, her revolutionary approach to autonomous reasoning. But every diagram bore Marcus's name, every innovation credited to his visionary leadership. The decision framework she'd spent 8 months perfecting, Marcus Wellington's contribution, the ethical weighting algorithm that had taken her 6 months to debug, Marcus Wellington's breakthrough, the recursive reasoning protocol that had nearly driven her to a nervous breakdown before she'd finally solved it at 4 a.m. In a fit of inspired desperation, Marcus Wellington's innovation, 3 years of her life reduced to various in the contributor list. Her hands shook as she scrolled through page after page of stolen genius, each technical description written in language that proved Marcus had understood exactly what he was taking. This wasn't simple corporate theft. It was intellectual rape, methodical and comprehensive. The worst part was how good the documentation was. Marcus had absorbed enough of her explanations to write compelling technical descriptions, peppering the patent applications with just enough detail to sound authoritative. He'd studied her work the way a counterfeiter studies currency, learning every nuance so he could replicate it convincingly. By morning she'd found 17 separate patent applications, all listing Marcus as primary inventor, all describing innovations that had emerged from her mind during countless late-night sessions in TechNova's lab. The scope of the theft was breathtaking. Not just ARIA's core architecture, but every improvement, every optimization, every breakthrough she'd achieved over 3 years. She arrived at TechNova that morning with printouts of the patent applications clutched in her sweating palm. Marcus's assistant tried to deflect her, citing his busy schedule, but Olivia simply walked past her into his corner office. Marcus looked up from his dual monitors, with the mild annoyance of someone interrupted during important work. Behind him, the Silicon Valley skyline stretched to the horizon, a vista of innovation and ambition that suddenly seemed to mock everything she'd believed about merit and recognition. "Olivia," he said, his tone carrying the careful patience reserved for unstable employees, "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" She dropped the patent applications on his desk like an accusation. Autonomous neural architecture for multi-domain decision processing, 17 patents, all with your name as primary inventor. Marcus glanced at the papers without apparent concern, then looked back at her with that practiced smile she'd once found reassuring. "Standard intellectual property protection. The company needs to secure its innovations in a competitive marketplace. Your innovation." Her voice cracked on the words. "Marcus, you've never written a line of code in your life. You don't understand the first thing about neural architecture or autonomous reasoning. These are my algorithms, my frameworks, my solutions to problems you couldn't even comprehend." Olivia. His tone became slightly sharper, the corporate politeness wearing thin. "You're clearly under stress, which is understandable given the recent restructuring, but I need you to be very careful about what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating fact. You're stealing my work and putting your name on it." Marcus stood slowly, his full height and expensive suit designed to intimidate. Behind him, James Crawford materialized in the doorway like a summoned demon, drawn by the sound of potential legal complication. "Let me be very clear," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Every innovation, developed at TechNova using company resources, belongs to TechNova. Every patent application reflects the company's investment in research and development. Your employment contract, which you signed voluntarily, assigns all intellectual property to the company, but you're listing yourself as the inventor. As CEO, I direct the strategic vision that guides all innovation. These patents reflect my leadership and oversight of the development process. James Crawford stepped forward, his pale features arranged in an expression of practiced concern. Marcus, perhaps I should speak with Olivia privately about the legal implications of her concern. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Olivia felt the walls of the corporate machine closing around her. The same machine that had ground up Chen Martinez and countless others. She was nothing to them. A resource to be exploited, then discarded when she became inconvenient. You can't do this, she whispered. It's already done. Marcus replied, the patents have been filed, the intellectual property has been secured, and frankly, your recent performance issues make it clear that this transition has been difficult for you. Perhaps it would be best if you took some time off to reassess your priorities. Performance issues. The phrase was a corporate weapon, designed to build a paper trail for her eventual termination. Olivia realized she was watching her career being systematically destroyed in real time, each word carefully chosen to justify whatever punishment they had planned. I could go public, she said desperately. Tell the real story about who created ARIA. James Crawford's smile was arctic. I wouldn't recommend that course of action. Your employment agreement includes very specific complementarity clauses. Any public discussion of proprietary development processes would constitute a material breach of contract, subjecting you to significant financial penalties and legal action. She was trapped, silenced by legal documents she'd signed in good faith, watching her life's work be attributed to a man who viewed her as nothing more than an expendable cog in his profit machine. That evening she called Dr. Helen Carter. Her former MIT professor answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her Olivia's favorite mentor during graduate school. They met at a small restaurant near the Stanford campus, far enough from TechNova to avoid surveillance but close enough to Carter's consulting office to seem coincidental. You look terrible, Carter said without preamble, her sharp eyes cataloging the damage 3 months of corporate warfare had inflicted. What's happened to you, Olivia? The story poured out. The salary cut, the patent theft, the systematic erasure of her contribution. Carter listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grim. As the details accumulated, the patent applications are particularly troubling, Carter said finally, not just because of the attribution, but because of what they represent. Marcus isn't just stealing credit. He's creating a legal fiction that could reshape how AI innovation is valued and protected. What do you mean? If these patents stand, they establish precedent that executive leadership can claim primary inventor status for technologies they didn't create. It's corporate feudalism, the lords of industry claiming ownership of their serfs' innovations. Carter's words crystallized something that had been forming in Olivia's mind for weeks. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every brilliant engineer, every innovative programmer, every creative mind who might be crushed by the corporate machine that treated human genius as raw material to be processed and repackaged. There has to be something I can do, Olivia said quietly. Carter was silent for a long moment, studying her former student's face with the intensity she'd once reserved for particularly complex, theoretical problems. There are always options, she said finally, but some options carry consequences that extend far beyond immediate satisfaction. Some doors once opened change everything. The words echoed Sarah's warning about doors without handle. But as Olivia sat in the restaurant, watching her mentor struggle with ethical implications, she realized she'd already walked through the first door when she'd signed TechNova's employment contract 3 years ago. The question now wasn't whether to open another door. It was whether she had the courage to kick it down. That night, while David slept beside her, Olivia retrieved Emma Richardson's business card from her wallet. The number seemed to pulse in the darkness, promising escape from the corporate cage that had trapped her. She typed out a simple text message. "I'm ready to discuss the Prometheus project. When can we meet?" The response came within minutes. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Same place. Come prepared to discuss technical specifications." Olivia stared at the message for a long time, understanding that she was about to cross a line from which there might be no return. But as she thought about Marcus's smile, about her stolen patents, about Chen debugging smartphone apps, she realized the line had already been crossed for her. The only question now was whether she would let them destroy her quietly, or whether she would make them pay for what they'd taken. She sent one word back. Yes. The encrypted USB drive was no bigger than a pack of gum, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Olivia's jacket pocket as she walked through TechNova's security checkpoint. The morning scanner beeped cheerfully as she passed through, the guards offering their usual polite nods, completely unaware that she was carrying the architectural blueprints for their company's most valuable asset. 3 weeks had passed since her second meeting with Emma Richardson. 3 weeks of careful preparation and escalating paranoia. Emma had provided sophisticated tools, encrypted drives, secure communication software, even a detailed schedule of TechNova's security protocols that suggested Quantum Dynamics had been planning this operation for months. Start small, Emma had advised during their clandestine meeting in a different coffee shop, this one in San Jose where the chances of recognition were minimal. Core architectural frameworks for. We need to understand ARIA's decision-making hierarchy before we can replicate its autonomous reasoning capabilities. The technical discussions had been intoxicating. Emma demonstrated an impressive understanding of AI architecture, asking precisely the right questions to draw out ARIA's most innovative features. For the first time in months, Olivia felt intellectually appreciated, her expertise valued rather than dismissed. But it was the financial incentive that had sealed her commitment. Emma had arrived at their second meeting with a preliminary contract, $50,000 for the initial architectural specifications, with escalating payments as more detailed information was provided. The final payout, assuming successful implementation of a competing system, would total $2 million, enough to start her own company, enough to never depend on corporate masters again. Now, sitting at her workstation in TechNova's development lab, Olivia accessed ARIA's core directories with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts to appear normal. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using her legitimate access credentials to commit corporate espionage, hiding her theft behind the very authority TechNova had granted her. The morning passed in a careful dance of legitimate work punctuated by moments of strategic data copying. A few lines of code here, architectural diagrams there, nothing so comprehensive that its absence would be immediately noticed. Emma had emphasized the importance of patience too much, too fast, and TechNova's monitoring systems would flag unusual access patterns, working hard or hardly working. The voice made her jump and she spun around to find Chen approaching her workstation with a coffee and his characteristic tired smile. Since his own salary cut and demotion, he'd thrown himself into his work with the desperate intensity of someone trying to prove his value to employers who'd already decided he was expendable. Just optimizing some decision trees, Olivia replied, casually minimizing the window displaying ARIA's neural pathway specifications. Nothing exciting. Chen nodded, settling into the adjacent workstation with the resignation of someone who'd accepted his diminished circumstance. Watching him debug smartphone applications, problems a first-year computer science student could solve, while the algorithms he'd helped create powered a $890 million system made Olivia's stomach clench with guilt and rage. "Hey," she said impulsively, "have you thought about looking elsewhere? I mean, after what they did you?" Chen's laugh was bitter. With what reference, Marcus made it clear that anyone who leaves on bad terms won't get glowing recommendations. And the non-compete clauses make it nearly impossible to work on AI development at any other company for 2 years. Another layer of the corporate trap revealed itself. TechNova didn't just steal their innovations, they made it virtually impossible for their victims to escape and rebuild elsewhere. The non-compete agreements were legal shackles, designed to ensure that brilliant minds remained trapped in corporate servitude, even after being systematically exploited. The knowledge only strengthened Olivia's resolve. If TechNova wanted to play corporate warfare, she would give them a war they'd never forget. The lunch hour provided her best opportunity for larger data transfers. Most of the development team disappeared to the cafeteria or nearby restaurants, leaving the lab largely empty. Olivia had discovered that the security monitoring systems were less sophisticated during non-peak hours, apparently designed under the assumption that major theft attempts would occur during busy periods when suspicious activity could be hidden among normal traffic. She was in the middle of copying ARIA's ethical decision frameworks when footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Panic flashed through her system as she recognized the measured pace, James Crawford making one of his irregular tours through the development area. Olivia quickly closed the transfer window and pulled up a legitimate optimization project, her heart hammering against her ribs as Crawford appeared in the lab doorway. His pale eyes swept the room like security cameras, cataloging every detail with the methodical precision of someone trained to spot anomalies. "Ms. Barnes," he said, approaching her workstation with that predatory smile that never seemed to reach his eyes. "Working through lunch again." "Just trying to stay on top of the optimization backlog," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. "The new efficiency requirements are pretty demanding." Crawford's gaze flicked to her monitor, taking in the code displayed there. For a terrifying moment, Olivia wondered if he possessed enough technical knowledge to recognize what she'd actually been working on, but his expression remained neutrally professional. "Dedicated as always," he said. "Though I hope you're not overextending yourself. The company values sustainable productivity over heroic efforts that lead to burnout." The subtle threat was vintage Crawford corporate speak designed to remind her that her position remained precarious, that any sign of instability could justify further disciplinary action. After he left, Olivia sat in the empty lab for several minutes, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline surge. This was the reality of her new existence: constant paranoia, perpetual fear of discovery, the exhausting mental gymnastics required to maintain her facade while systematically betraying her employer. That evening, she met Emma at a different location, a wine bar in Los Gatos, where tech industry networking was common enough to provide perfect cover. Emma arrived precisely on time, sliding into the booth across from Olivia with the fluid grace of someone comfortable operating in shadows. "How are we doing?" Emma asked, her tone suggesting casual conversation while her eyes scanned the room for potential threat. Olivia handed over the encrypted drive containing the day's harvest architectural specifications, decision tree algorithms, and partial documentation of ARIA's learning protocols. Emma pocketed it smoothly, the motion so natural it seemed like she was simply adjusting her purse. "This is excellent work," Emma said after reviewing the preliminary data on her phone. "The ethical weighting system is particularly sophisticated. Our engineers are impressed by the recursive reasoning implementation." The praise felt like warm sunlight after months of corporate winter. Someone finally understood the elegance of her innovations, the breakthrough thinking that had made ARIA possible. "There's something else," Emma continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "We've accelerated the Prometheus timeline. Management wants a working prototype within 6 months. That means we'll need access to ARIA's complete source code within the next month." The request hit Olivia like cold water. Complete source code meant everything, not just architectural frameworks, but the actual implementation details that would allow quantum dynamics to build a perfect copy of ARIA. It was the difference between inspiration and outright. "That's a lot more risk," Olivia said, carefully. "Accessing that much data would definitely trigger security alerts." Emma's smile became slightly sharper. "Which is why we're prepared to offer a completion bonus, another $1 million, paid upon successful delivery of the complete codebase, $1 million enough to disappear entirely, to start fresh somewhere TechNova's legal tentacles couldn't reach, enough to fund her own AI research lab, to build innovations that would actually bear her name. I'll need some time to figure out how to do it safely," Olivia said. "Of course." "But Olivia," Emma's voice carried a note of gentle warning, "opportunities like this don't last forever. The window for joining Prometheus as a founding architect is closing." We need commitment, not hesitation. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Olivia felt the weight of Emma's ultimatum settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She was no longer just selling information. She was being pressed to commit industrial espionage on a scale that would destroy TechNova's competitive advantage entirely. The drive home passed in a blur of ethical calculations and risk assessment. When she arrived at the house she shared with David, she found him grading papers in the living room, his expression troubled. "We need to talk," he said without looking up from his work. The words sent ice through her veins. "About what?" "About the fact that you've been lying to me for weeks. About the secret phone calls, the mysterious meetings, the way you flinch every time I ask about your day." David finally looked up, his eyes filled with pain and suspicion. "About whoever Emma Richardson is, and why she's been texting you at all hours." Olivia's carefully constructed double life began crumbling around her like a house of cards in an earthquake. She stared at the man she'd planned to marry, seeing in his face the reflection of her own moral collapse. "David, I can explain. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my fiancé has been living a secret life for weeks, and I'm starting to wonder if I know you at all anymore." The conversation that followed would determine whether her relationship could survive the choices she'd made, whether love could coexist with the darkness she'd embraced, whether some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive. But as she looked into David's eyes and prepared to either confess everything or lie to the person who loved her most, Olivia realized that Emma Richardson had been right about one thing: some windows of opportunity really were closing forever. The confrontation with David had lasted until 3 a.m., ending with her confession about Emma Richardson and quantum dynamics, but not about the espionage. She'd told him about the job offers, the meetings, the financial temptation, painting it as corporate headhunting rather than industrial theft. David had listened with the pained expression of someone watching a loved one walk toward a cliff, but he'd accepted her explanation, choosing trust over suspicion. The lie had tasted like ash in her mouth. Now, 2 days later, Olivia sat in TechNova's development lab, trying to focus on legitimate work while her encrypted drive burned like a guilty secret in her jacket pocket. She'd spent the previous evening copying ARIA's complete source code, nearly 3 years of revolutionary AI development compressed into a device smaller than her thumb. Emma's deadline was tomorrow. One final transfer, $1 million, and then she would disappear from Olivia's life forever, leaving her to rebuild from the ashes of her corporate immolation. "Interesting pattern analysis, Ms. Barnes." The voice behind her was like ice water down her spine. James Crawford stood at her shoulder, studying her monitor with the focused intensity of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. But instead of her legitimate optimization work, her screen displayed something that made her blood freeze. System access logs. Her access log. Every file she'd opened, every directory she'd browsed, every transfer she'd initiated, all laid out in neat columns that painted a perfect picture of systematic data theft. "I can explain," she began, but Crawford's raised hand silenced her. Conference room 12A. The walk to the executive floor felt like a death march. Other employees avoided eye contact as she passed, word of her summons having spread through the office grapevine with viral speed. The development team's chatter died as she entered the elevator, replaced by the kind of uncomfortable silence that accompanies public disgrace. Marcus Wellington was waiting in the same conference room where her salary had been slashed 3 months earlier, but this time he wasn't alone. The full executive board sat arrayed around the table like a corporate tribunal, their faces displaying various degrees of disappointment, anger, and what looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "Sit," Marcus commanded, and Olivia noticed he didn't bother with his usual false warmth. The mask was off now, revealing the cold calculation that had always lurked beneath his corporate charm. James Crawford activated a laptop connected to the room's main display, and suddenly her crimes were illuminated in high-definition access logs, file transfer records, security camera timestamps, a comprehensive dossier that documented every moment of her espionage with forensic precision. 3 weeks of systematic data theft, Crawford announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a prosecutor presenting an airtight case. Core architectural specifications, decision tree algorithms, neural pathway documentation, and as of yesterday evening, the complete ARIA source code. The room was silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 47 floors below. Olivia felt oddly detached, as if she were watching someone else's corporate execution from a safe distance. "We know about quantum dynamics," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying a deadly quiet that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "We know about Emma Richardson, we know about the coffee shops, the wine bars, the encrypted communication." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into her with laser intensity. "What I want to know is why. Why would someone I trusted, someone I mentored, someone I gave every opportunity to succeed, why would they betray everything we built together?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. For a moment, Olivia almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. Mentored, trusted, given opportunities. "You want to know why?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, carrying 3 months of suppressed rage and betrayal. "You stole my work. You cut my salary by 60% while taking credit for innovations I created. You put your name on patents describing algorithms you couldn't program if your life depended on it." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of genuine surprise, as if he'd expected her to grovel for forgiveness rather than attack. "I gave you a job," he said coldly. "I provided resources, infrastructure, support staff. Everything you accomplished happened because TechNova invested in your potential." "My potential?" Olivia stood up, no longer caring about consequences or corporate protocol. "ARIA exists because I worked 18-hour days for 3 years, because I solved problems your entire engineering department couldn't crack, because I sacrificed my relationship, my health, my sanity to build something revolutionary, and you repaid me by erasing my name from history. You were compensated, I was exploited." The words exploded out of her with 3 months of pent-up fury. "You turned me into a ghost in my own creation. You made me watch while you accepted awards for work you couldn't understand, gave interviews about innovations you didn't create, built a fortune on foundations I laid." James Crawford cleared his throat with the delicate precision of someone redirecting a conversation back to legal realities. "Emotional grievances aside, we have documented evidence of corporate espionage on an unprecedented scale. The theft of proprietary technology, violation of non-disclosure agreements, conspiracy to commit industrial sabotage." He produced a thick folder of legal documents, spreading them across the table like a winning poker hand. "Criminal charges, civil litigation, personal financial liability that would bankrupt you for the rest of your life, unless of course we can reach an understanding." The word understanding carried implications that made Olivia's skin crawl. They wanted something from her: cooperation, testimony, access to quantum dynamics plans. They wanted to use her betrayal as a weapon against their competitors. "What kind of understanding?" she asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his corporate smile returning for the first time since she'd entered the room. "Emma Richardson isn't just a talent acquisition specialist. She's quantum dynamics head of competitive intelligence, corporate espionage in less polite terms. You're not her first target, and you won't be her last." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Emma, who'd made her feel valued and appreciated, who'd offered financial salvation and intellectual recognition. She was a professional manipulator, a corporate spy who'd played Olivia like a violin. "Help us," Marcus continued, "and we can minimize the legal consequences. Testify about quantum dynamics' industrial espionage program, provide evidence of their systematic theft of trade secrets, and we might be able to frame this as temporary mental instability rather than criminal conspiracy." The offer was a lifeline wrapped in chains. Cooperation would save her from prison, but would also make her a corporate double agent, forever trapped between two companies that viewed her as nothing more than a useful tool. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until Monday," Crawford replied. "After that, we file criminal charges and let the justice system sort it out." As she was escorted from the building by security, a final humiliation witnessed by every colleague she'd worked alongside for 3 years, Olivia's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Complications on our end. Meeting postponed indefinitely. Destroy all materials and maintain radio silence until further notice." Even now, at the moment of her complete exposure, Emma was abandoning her to protect quantum dynamics interests. The woman who'd promised partnership and recognition had vanished the instant Olivia became a liability rather than an asset. Standing in TechNova's parking garage with her cardboard box of personal belongings, officially suspended pending the outcome of their internal investigation, Olivia felt the full weight of her isolation settle around her like a shroud. She'd betrayed her employer, lost her career, damaged her relationship with David, and been abandoned by the people who'd convinced her to risk everything. But as she drove home through Silicon Valley's endless traffic, past billboards advertising the latest technological breakthroughs, and office buildings housing the next generation of digital innovators, Olivia realized that her war with TechNova was far from over. They'd exposed her espionage, but they hadn't recovered the data. Somewhere in quantum dynamics' secure servers, ARIA's complete source code was being analyzed, reverse-engineered, and transformed into a competing product that would shatter TechNova's market dominance. Marcus Wellington thought he'd won by catching her theft and offering her a devil's bargain, but he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that corporate warfare followed corporate rules. Olivia Barnes was about to teach him that some wars had no rules at all. The news broke on a Tuesday morning that would be remembered as the day Silicon Valley declared war on itself. Olivia first learned about it from her phone buzzing incessantly with news alerts as she sat in her kitchen, staring at the coffee that had grown cold while she contemplated Marcus Wellington's ultimatum. TechStock Weekly's push notification was characteristically blunt, breaking. TechNova files 2.8b lawsuit against Quantum Dynamics for systematic corporate espionage. Within minutes her phone became a portal to chaos. CNN Business, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, every major financial news outlet was covering what they were already calling the largest corporate espionage case in tech industry history. The allegations were breathtaking in scope: systematic theft of trade secrets, industrial sabotage, conspiracy to destroy market competition through illegal acquisition of proprietary technology. At the center of every article was a photograph of her. The image had been pulled from TechNova's corporate website, a professional headshot taken during her first year, when she'd still believed in the company's mission and her own future there. The caption identified her as Olivia Barnes, the TechNova engineer at the center of the espionage allegations, as if she were patient zero in a corporate epidemic. Her phone rang. Sarah Mitchell's name appeared on the screen like a lifeline. "Are you watching the news?" Sarah's voice carried a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Hard to avoid," Olivia replied, clicking through to another article that featured a timeline of her alleged crimes, alongside stock price graphs showing TechNova's market value plummeting in real time. "This is insane. They're painting you as some kind of master spy. The comments sections are calling you everything from a traitor to a criminal mastermind." Olivia scrolled through the reader responses beneath one article. Each comment a small dagger of public judgment. Corporate terrorist, greedy betrayer, should be in prison. The anonymity of the internet had unleashed a torrent of vitriol from people who knew nothing about her situation beyond what corporate spin doctors had fed to reporters. "There's something else," Sarah continued. Her voice dropped. "Quantum Dynamics just announced their own lawsuit. They're claiming TechNova has been conducting illegal surveillance of their employees, hacking their systems, and engaging in predatory hiring practices to steal their talent." The countersuit was brilliant legal theater, painting Quantum Dynamics as the victim of TechNova's corporate aggression rather than the perpetrator of industrial theft. Emma Richardson had probably crafted the strategy weeks ago, anticipating exactly this scenario and preparing a narrative that would muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. "They're using you," Sarah said gently. "Both sides. You're not the protagonist in this story, you're the weapon they're fighting over." Before Olivia could respond, another call interrupted. David's name flashed on the screen, and she realized with sick certainty that he'd seen the news. "I need to take this," she told Sarah, switching calls with trembling fingers. "Jesus Christ, Olivia." David's voice was strained, carrying the weight of someone whose world had just collapsed. "I'm looking at CNN right now and they're calling you a corporate spy. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She could lie again, spin another story about misunderstandings and legal technicality, but the evidence was already public. Security footage of her accessing restricted files, email records of her communications with Emma Richardson, financial documents showing suspicious payments from Quantum Dynamics subsidiaries. David, I can explain. Because what I'm reading sounds like my fiancé has been living a double life for months, stealing company secrets and selling them to competitors for millions of dollars. The pain in his voice was worse than any corporate tribunal. This was the man who'd loved her through graduate school poverty, who'd celebrated every career milestone, who'd proposed with the ring his grandmother had worn for 60 years, and she'd repaid his trust by becoming exactly the kind of person he'd taught his students to recognize as a cautionary tale. I was angry, she said, the words feeling pathetically inadequate. They stole my work, cut my salary, erased my name from everything I'd created. I wanted them to pay. So you committed corporate espionage. You threw away your career, your reputation, your freedom for revenge. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen, Olivia? Did you think you could steal trade secrets and sell them to competitors without consequence? Did you think no one would notice when Quantum Dynamics suddenly developed technology identical to yours? The questions cut deeper because she couldn't answer them honestly. She had thought she could get away with. She'd convinced herself that her anger justified any action, that TechNova's betrayal had given her moral license to betray them in return. I need some time to think, David said finally, about us, about whether I can be with someone who did what you did. The line went dead, leaving Olivia alone in her kitchen with the cold coffee and the endless stream of news alerts, documenting her transformation from respected engineer to public villain. The first television news crew arrived at her house 2 hours later. She watched from her bedroom window as a van with satellite equipment parked across the street, followed by reporters with cameras and microphones who seemed disappointed to find only suburban quiet instead of dramatic confrontation. They set up on her lawn anyway, broadcasting live updates about the house where the accused corporate spy is believed to be hiding. Her phone rang constantly, reporters seeking interviews, lawyers offering representation, former colleagues expressing either support or condemnation. She stopped answering after the 10th call, letting them all go to voicemail to create a digital monument to her social destruction. The most devastating call came from Dr. Helen Carter. I'm watching the news, her former mentor said without preamble. Tell me they're wrong about what you did. Professor, tell me you didn't steal proprietary technology and sell it to competitors. Tell me the student I mentored, the brilliant mind I recommended for graduate programs and corporate positions, didn't throw away everything for money. The disappointment in Carter's voice was absolute, the kind reserved for students who'd betrayed not just rules but principles. Olivia had become living proof that brilliance without ethics was just sophisticated corruption. I can't tell you that, Olivia whispered. Then God help you, because I don't think anyone else can. By evening, the story had evolved beyond corporate litigation into something approaching a cultural phenomenon. Business schools were already incorporating it into ethics curricula. Tech blogs were dissecting every decision in her career trajectory, looking for warning signs that might have predicted her fall from grace. Social media had turned her name into a hashtag representing everything wrong with Silicon Valley's competitive culture. But the most chilling development came in a single text message from an unknown number. You've started something you can't control. Both companies are prepared to destroy each other to win this war. Thousands of jobs will be lost. Billions in market value will evaporate. Sleep well knowing what you've unleashed. The message was unsigned, but Olivia suspected it came from someone inside one of the warring corporations, an employee watching their world burn because of choices she'd made in anger and desperation. As night fell over Silicon Valley, she sat in her darkened living room watching news coverage of the story that had consumed her life. Stock markets were in chaos, with both companies hemorrhaging value as investors fled anything connected to the scandal. Legal experts predicted years of litigation that would devastate both corporations, regardless of who ultimately won in court. Somewhere in Quantum Dynamics headquarters, Emma Richardson was probably celebrating the successful acquisition of ARIA's technology while distancing herself from the spy who'd delivered it. Somewhere in TechNova's executive suite, Marcus Wellington was orchestrating a public relations campaign designed to paint him as the victim of industrial sabotage rather than the architect of corporate exploitation. And somewhere in the space between their competing narratives, Olivia Barnes had become the villain in a story where everyone claimed to be the hero. The war she'd started would reshape Silicon Valley's landscape, destroy careers, and alter how the tech industry approached innovation and competition. But as she sat alone in the house she might soon lose to legal fees, watching her professional obituary play out on national television, Olivia realized that victory and defeat had become meaningless categories. She'd wanted justice and instead had created only chaos. 6 weeks after the scandal broke, Silicon Valley looked like a war zone. Olivia discovered this firsthand during her first venture outside the house, since the media siege had finally subsided. The local coffee shop where she'd once been a regular customer now featured a wall of shame behind counter newspaper clippings about the TechNova quantum dynamics legal battle, with her photograph prominently displayed among other corporate traitors who'd betrayed the Valley's sacred trust. The barista, someone she'd chatted with dozens of times about AI ethics and the future of automation, didn't recognize her behind the baseball cap and sunglasses, or perhaps he simply pretended not to, sparing them both the awkwardness of serving coffee to Silicon Valley's most notorious villain. She'd come here to meet Chen, who'd texted her the previous evening with a message that had sent ice through her veins. "We need to talk. It's about the layoffs." The morning's news had been devastating. TechNova had announced its third round of cuts in 6 weeks. 850 employees terminated as legal costs and lost business partnerships decimated their operating budget. Quantum Dynamics had responded with their own reductions, citing market uncertainty and litigation expenses as justification for eliminating 600 positions. Combined with the subsidiary companies, contractors and vendor relationships that had collapsed in the corporate warfare's wake, the unemployment toll was approaching 3,000 people whose livelihoods had been sacrificed to fund the legal battle she'd ignited. Chen arrived 20 minutes late, looking haggard in a way that went beyond simple exhaustion. His usual optimistic demeanor had been replaced by something Olivia had never seen in him before: despair. "They fired me yesterday," he said without preamble, slumping into the chair across from her. Official reason was redundancy elimination, but we both know what it really was. "Chen, I'm so sorry. My whole team is gone. Sarah Kim, Tom Rodriguez, everyone who worked on ARIA's decision framework implementation. They called it restructuring, but it's really punishment for being associated with you." The words hit her like physical blows. These were brilliant engineers, innovative thinkers who'd contributed essential work to ARIA's development. They were being destroyed not because of their own actions, but because their proximity to her had made them liabilities in TechNova's public relations war. "What about your stock options, your benefits?" Chen's laugh was bitter and hollow, void. "Apparently, anyone connected to security-compromised projects forfeits their equity compensation. 3 years of stock options, gone. My health insurance runs out next month, and Elena's pregnancy means we can't afford Cobra." Elena, Chen's wife, was 6 months pregnant with their first child, and now they faced unemployment, mounting medical bills, and the professional stigma that came with being fired from TechNova during the espionage scandal. "The worst part," Chen continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I can't get interviews anywhere. Every HR department in the Valley knows I worked on ARIA. They see my name on the development team and assume I was part of the theft. I'm radioactive." Olivia stared into her coffee, seeing in its dark surface a reflection of the destruction she'd caused. She'd told herself that her war was with Marcus Wellington and TechNova's executive leadership, not with innocent employees who were simply trying to build careers and support families. But corporate warfare didn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. It consumed everything in its path. "There's something else," Chen said, pulling out his phone and showing her a news article. "Did you see this?" The headline made her stomach clench: "TechNova subsidiary forced into bankruptcy as legal costs mount." The article detailed how 3 smaller companies that had licensed ARIA's technology were now facing financial ruin as their contracts were voided, pending the lawsuit's resolution. 2 had already declared bankruptcy. The third was desperately seeking bridge financing while their 150 employees faced imminent unemployment. That's not even the worst of it, Chen continued, scrolling through his phone. Remember Jackson Dynamics, the startup that was building medical diagnostic tools using ARIA's pattern recognition? Olivia nodded. Jackson Dynamics had been developing revolutionary cancer screening technology that could detect malignancies months earlier than conventional methods. Their work had the potential to save thousands of lives by catching cancers before they became terminal, dead, completely shut down. Their FDA approval was contingent on using proven AI systems, and now that ARIA's intellectual property is tied up in litigation, they can't pursue. 5 years of medical research gone. Cancer patients who might have been saved will die because the technology they needed is locked in a corporate legal battle. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her personal vendetta against Marcus Wellington that she'd never considered the ripple effects of her actions. Medical breakthroughs delayed, scientific research abandoned, human lives potentially lost because she'd chosen revenge over responsibility. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. Chen looked at her with eyes that held no anger, only profound sadness. "Because I need you to understand what your choices cost, not just for you, not just for the companies involved, but for everyone caught in the crossfire." As if summoned by their conversation, Olivia's phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Helen Carter. She'd been avoiding her former mentor for weeks, unable to face the disappointment in Carter's voice, but something in Chen's words compelled her to answer. "We need to meet," Carter said, without pleasantries. "Today, there are things you need to know about the broader implications of what you've done." They met at Carter's office at Stanford, where the professor had spent the morning compiling what she called her damage assessment, a comprehensive analysis of how the TechNova quantum dynamics war was affecting the broader tech ecosystem. "Sit," Carter commanded, her tone carrying the authority that had once made graduate students scramble to complete assignments. The woman who'd been Olivia's champion and mentor now looked at her with clinical detachment, as if she were a particularly interesting case study in moral failure. "The venture capital community is in panic," Carter began, pulling up charts and graphs on her office display. "Investment in AI startups has dropped 60% since your scandal broke. Investors are terrified of intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, employee defection. Promising technologies are being shelved because no one wants to risk building something that might be stolen." She clicked to the next slide, showing a map of Silicon Valley with red dots marking failed companies. 47 startups have folded or suspended operations due to the uncertainty you've created. That's roughly 800 jobs, and approximately $2.3 billion in lost innovation value. The numbers were staggering, but Carter wasn't finished. "The international implications are even worse. The European Union is using your case as justification for new regulations that will severely restrict American tech companies' operations abroad. China is pointing to the scandal as evidence that Western corporate practices are inherently corrupt, strengthening their position in global AI governance discussions." Olivia felt physically sick. She'd wanted to strike back at Marcus Wellington's exploitation, but her actions had metastasized into something that threatened the entire industry's credibility and competitive position. "But the worst part," Carter continued, her voice taking on the disappointed tone reserved for students who'd betrayed fundamental principles, "is what you've done to trust. Engineers are questioning whether their innovations will be stolen by colleagues. Companies are implementing surveillance systems that treat employees like potential criminals. The collaborative culture that made Silicon Valley innovative is being replaced by paranoia and suspicion." "I never meant for any of this to happen," Olivia whispered. "Intent is irrelevant," Carter replied sharply. "Results are what matter. You've damaged not just 2 companies, but an entire ecosystem built on the premise that brilliant people can work together to solve important problems." As Olivia left Stanford that afternoon, she understood that her war with TechNova had evolved far beyond personal vendetta into something approaching industrial terrorism. The collateral damage extended far beyond corporate boardrooms into hospitals, where cancer patients couldn't access better diagnostic tools, research labs where promising innovations had been abandoned, and families where breadwinners faced unemployment through no fault of their own. She'd sought justice and created only chaos. She'd wanted recognition and achieved only infamy. Most devastating of all, she'd become exactly what Marcus Wellington had always claimed she was, a threat to everything Silicon Valley represented. The question now wasn't whether she could win her war against TechNova, but whether she could find a way to end it before the destruction she'd unleashed consumed everything she'd once believed was worth protecting. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.